Good morning. Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee and Chat with Hallee Bridgeman. I'm so happy you could join me this morning. I have my cup of coffee, so I hope you have your cup of coffee or tea or whatever you drink in the morning, and you have a few minutes while we chat. So this might look different to you on your end. I am coming to you from my computer camera instead of from my camera, and I have a microphone hooked up so that you can hear me well. And what we're going to do is, I did this so that you can see my screen, because the question that I'm answering today is, do I plot my books or am I pantser? And what that means is a pantser is someone who writes by the seat of their pants. And so do I plot or do I pants? Well, originally, when I first started writing, the very first book I wrote was A Melody for James. And I pantsed it, basically. I started writing. 6 weeks later, it was written. I didn't know what I was writing as I was doing it, and it just kind of came to me. But really, what happened was, I was completely unskilled. I had never written anything before. I had never contemplated writing anything before. And so I would imagine a scene, like if you've read A Melody for James, I imagined the car chase scene several chapters before it happened. And so I wrote toward that car chase. And then, the next big event that happened, I wrote toward that. There was like a specific conversation that I knew in my mind that my characters would have. So I wrote toward that conversation. And that's how my book came about. And so the first few books I wrote were truly pantsed, but in this weird way, like in my mind, where I was writing toward directions. And then I started plotting in a way that was like, I would sit down with Word. I used Microsoft Word, and then I used Lotus Word Pro. And I would just say, in chapter 1, this happens. And in chapter 2, this happens. And it was kind of like I was doing it before, except I was actually just writing down instead of in my mind having it. And then I wrote the Virtues and Valor series. Well, the Virtues and Valor series is really, really necessary to have a plot, because it's 8 perspectives, 8 different characters' point of views of the same event. And so, within all 8 books, there's the same conversation. And in this book, it's this conversation from this person's point of view and this conversation from this person's point of view. And it just is so complex of a story to not have it plotted out didn't make any sense. And so I had whiteboards all over the place, and I had note cards. And so it would be like on the whiteboards, I drew columns, and I'm like, okay, Temperance's Trial, this is the plot. Homeland's Hope, this is the plot. And then with a note card, I would say this event happened also in Homeland's Hope and Temperance's Trial. And here's what the differences in points of view are. And then I would have note cards that kind of moved from whiteboard to whiteboard depending on what book I was writing, because it had to be identical. Each book couldn't change. Nothing could change if it was the same conversation or the same movements inside a scene. It all had to be identical. And so actually writing the Virtues and Valor series taught me how to plot. And then I discovered a program called Scrivener. Well, Scrivener was developed by writers for writers. It's actually something that's designed to help writers write in a way that just makes everything efficient for them. So I'm going to let you see my screen, and then I'm going to show you what my Scrivener looks like. Okay, so this is a Scrivener when you first open it and nothing's been done. Brand new file. I named it Sample. And you can see what it has done is create the manuscript. So this would be a chapter, and here's the scene. So this is the first sentence of the scene. All right, so you can see that this, and if I delete the word scene, it will it'll repopulate that with like the first part of the first beginning words of that chapter. All right, so what it looks like is, and we'll call this chapter, we'll call it chapter 1. All right. So, and the manuscript we're going to title sample novel. All right. Now we have sample novel, chapter 1. This is the first scene. Now, if you look at this, you can see that it looks like a cork board with an index card on it. And so clearly the creators of Scrivener, this is how they think, which is note cards laid out to tell the story. So if I added another chapter, I'm going to add a new folder. That's what they call chapters. And we're going to call this one chapter 2. Now, when you go back to the novel, you can see chapter 1 and chapter 2. And so I can add another folder, and I can add another folder. I can add as many as I want. I can add 5,000 if I wanted. Well, I don't know. I haven't tried. I reckon I could. So, okay, so here we are. This is what it looks like in the corkboard. Now, there's also, I could look at it as an outline. Chapter 1. This is the first sentence. This is the scene. And I could rename this, the first scene, introduction of Jane Doe. All right, so that's now what this scene is titled, is the introduction of Jane Doe. This is the first sentence of the scene. So when you look now at the layout of the outline, it says chapter 1, introduction of Jane Doe. And now I can say I want to add new text, and I'm going to say introduction of John Smith. Okay, here is the first sentence of the introduction of John Smith. All right, and so when I look at my novel in an outline form, introduction of Jane Doe, introduction of John Smith, and if I look at chapter 1, here's the layout of chapter 1, introduction of Jane Doe, introduction of John Smith. And if I look at my whole book, I can choose to see it in an outline, or I can choose to see it as a corkboard. And in Scrivenings, it's not the titles, it's the words. So you would see the whole book laid out. And I work in the corkboard. And this is what I do. In chapter 1, or I don't actually write in chapter 1. Jane Doe and John Smith meet. Sparks fly. Okay, so this is what chapter 1 is about. Chapter 2. Jane Doe goes to work in the factory, and we meet her best friend, Anna Baker. Okay, so I do this. I go through each chapter and say what happens. All right, I could then go into each scene and say, we introduce Jane Doe. We introduce John Smith. And I could, and so when I'm here inside this, when we're here inside this scene, I see over here the synopsis of this scene is that we're introducing Jane Doe. And I can see over here in this chapter that the synopsis of this chapter is that Jane Doe and John Smith meet and sparks fly. But I can also see each chapter by chapter as a corkboard, and I can see each chapter by chapter as an outline, however I want to see it. So I'll show you one that I have plotted, but I have not yet written. And so here, and you can see I have not numbered these chapters. And the reason that I haven't numbered them is because there's only 18 chapters here, and this will likely be between 25 and 30 chapters. And so what this is like serious plot points, chapter by chapter. However, I know that I need to add a chapter in between these two chapters, and I need to lighten it up. It's getting heavy, lighter scene. And so I might say Dwayne takes Magnolia fishing or whatever. And so here's how my books are. I write character-driven stories. And so what my original outline, and this is an original outline. This was just me. I've done 4 books in this series. This is my chef series. This is the first book of the chef series. And I need to know what's going to happen in all 4 books because they are a series. And so all this is the plot points, plot point, plot point. And I know that I need to grow my characters and grow my plot in between these plot points. And so once I get this out, and this doesn't take me very long at all. I know the story when I sit down and start writing this. I know my characters when I sit down and start writing this. All I am doing is laying out the story that's in my mind onto note cards. And it would be no different if I had index cards and I was writing it by hand and laying them out on a table or on a wall or on a corkboard or whatever. And so then I see my plot and I see everything laid out, just like when I was writing A Melody for James and I knew that I was writing toward that car chase. But now I need to add some character development and some conversations with my main characters, and I need to bring some humor into it, or I need to bring some passion into it, or I need to grow their romance or provide some conflict. And so all of that is what comes in between all of those plot points that I know that I'm writing toward. And that's how I plot. And so like when I sit down to actually write, so right now I'm writing Valerie's Verdict, which is the first book of the Dixon Brothers series. And so I had it just like that Scribner thing where it was, you know, chapter, 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 but like it was more detailed. So when I sat down on my first day to write it, I looked at all of the major plot points and then inserted cards and said, Valerie at work. And that's all it was. And so when I was writing it last week, that was my next chapter. And the synopsis was Valerie at work. And I was like, okay, let's write Valerie at work. And while I'm writing Valerie at work, she's interacting with her coworkers and she's thinking thoughts and she's doing this and she's doing that and she's going to this meeting and she's doing this thing. And my character is growing, but my plot is still coming, you know, and there's more to it. And, you know, I have like within a more filler would be Brad and his brothers go fishing, and they specifically talk about this. And so, you know, and so yes, I plot. I plot very specifically. And when I teach a class called Writing in Layers, which is how I explain my ability to write a book as quickly as I write it. And one of the things I do is outline my book. And I have a friend who has, I have a friend who is a artist. And so she drew, or she posted on Facebook this picture of her latest upcoming painting. And it was this perfect example of, like, I was trying to figure out how to visualize what it is that I do with my books to explain to people how I'm able to write so fast. And I'm going to try to see if I can pull up the book. I should have had it prepped and prepared, but I didn't think I would go that way with my talking. And so she paints these beautiful paintings, but she draws them in an outline first. And then she goes in and she adds another layer, and then she goes in and she adds another layer. And let's see if this will pull up for me. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen again, and you can see how I have set up so I contacted her and I said, can you please take a picture of each process of this? And so Here's her drawing. And that's what made me originally contact her. And so this is what I consider my outline when I do my index cards is this. And so then, you know, she just adds layer by layer by layer by layer until her book is finished. And, or not, I'm sorry, her painting is finished. And that's how I write. And I teach like this hour-long class on how I do that. And the first step after developing your characters is to then create the outline, the black and white sketch. And so there's, you know, that original outline of that original black and white sketch compared to the final product, there's so much more depth and color and, you know, presence of that painting than there was in the original black and white sketch, just as there is from my outline to my final book. But it's still very organized in the way that I develop it to flow. So thank you for that question. And I hope that you have a fantastic week. We have 3 more weeks of school here in Kentucky, and I'm trying to get as much writing as I can before school gets out, because I want to kind of be ahead of my schedule. So I will see you next week. And if you have a question for me, go to my website, halleebridgeman.com, and I will add it to the queue of questions to answer. You'll see the little coffee cup on the sidebar, and just click that coffee cup and it will take you to the Google form to fill out my question, or fill out the question for me. So have a great week. God bless you.